Right, Peter?
Correct. We had an event with another partner institution just the weekend before, and although there were lots of online participants, a few hundred, but the YouTube ones hit several thousands, so it can beef up.
So Peter, please meet Sunil, Rajat, and of course Michael.
Nice to meet you all.
And Peter Ramel.
Nice to meet you too.
So great. So Peter, I will start. I think it's time to start. I'll start and then I'll hand it over to you and I'll go back to the discussion.
Yes, okay. Please go ahead.
Yeah.
We can start now.
Okay, all right, great. All right, so let's go live. So good evening and welcome to the 7th Gateway House Cast webcast. In all the gloom of COVID-19 around us, I have the happy job of introducing a panel of experts to discuss a very optimistic and successful trend taking place in India, that of digital manufacturing. Some of you may remember the Deming Prize that all Indian companies vied to get. The 21st century equivalent is being part of the Lighthouse Network, a recognition from the World Economic Forum for companies that have successfully digitized their manufacturing and are prepared for the future. There are 69 such companies around the world, and this month, India doubled its count from 1 to 3. To discuss this, we have an excellent group of experts. Sunil Mathur, the CEO of Siemens India, which has transformed a brownfield facility into a digitized one. Rajat Gupta of McKinsey, who has led some of these transformative Industry 4.0 initiatives. And Michael Mandel of the Progressive Policy Institute in Washington, D.C., who has led the global research on digital manufacturing and created the manufacturing stack, which explains how this all works. We will run the discussion for about 40 minutes, followed by 15 minutes of audience Q&A. Please send in your questions in the chat box, and I request you to mute yourselves during the discussion. Gentlemen, I look forward to our discussion, but before that, I request Peter Ramel, the resident representative of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, Stiftung, to make opening remarks. Peter?
Thank you. Esteemed panelists, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, my dear Manjeet, in the current times of crisis, nobody will doubt that, many have described globalization as moving in slow motion. However, I would rather argue that globalization has moved towards digital inclusion and has actually even accelerated in the midst of this new digital revolution we are currently witnessing. Ever-increasing quantities of digital interventions and tools allow people from all corners of the world to connect and communicate quickly, easily and efficiently from the comfort of their homes, providing us with the opportunity for deeper and stronger collaboration than at any other time in human history. Now, if we look at the screen, this, what I described theoretically, is just what we're doing practically in the moment. For every obstacle to globalization, it seems there is a catalyst for a new kind of connectivity. Companies need to understand and adapt swiftly to these new realities if they are to remain competitive in the global marketplace instead of being left in the dust. If this global crisis has shown us one thing, it is that digital is no longer optional. Recent global supply chain disruptions and the subsequent realization of the necessity for greater supply chain diversification are driving an acute need for quantitative and qualitative growth amid shifts in supply, demand, and customer expectations for digital-first experiences. An excellent example of what companies can accomplish, and as we have a guest from Siemens India today, we looked a little bit in what Siemens Germany is doing on the innovation front. So an excellent example of what companies can accomplish through digital manufacturing, and I'm certain that Mr. Mathur will be able to provide us with many more valuable in-depth insights on this, can be observed by looking at Siemens. In 2010, the company started digitizing its own manufacturing plant in Amberg in Germany, that's in Bavaria. Over the next decade, the factory evolved from 25% digital to 75%. During this relatively short amount of time, productivity improved by an astonishing, and now listen, 1,400%. Before embarking towards digitization, the factory could produce 5 products only. 12 months after its increased digitization, the factory was able to produce 1,300 different products with a capacity to produce 9,000 in total. So that is just a sample. Apart from these impressive numbers, Siemens is also a textbook example of the need to collaborate and share know-how with other companies located in the like-minded democratic countries. While I'm known for generally being a strong proponent of a strategic partnership with India, I consider the cooperation between Germany and India in the digital manufacturing sector to be even more of an imperative, as the subcontinent can cushion many of the problems that most Western countries face, such as an aging workforce. To prevent the brain drain and the loss of institutional knowledge, as large parts of the workforce will be soon retiring, manufacturers in Europe and the US will need to step up cooperation with partners located in countries with a younger demographic structure, such as India, and continue on an even larger scale to transfer their most recent technologies to local Indian operations. Moreover, this devastating pandemic has reminded us that we need to diversify our global supply chains away from monopolies that have already formed, especially in China, and that we must prevent the formation of such monopolies from occurring in the times that lie ahead. Last year, Chinese companies invested $13 billion in European Union countries, most of which went into mergers and acquisitions, with only a minimal amount going into the creation of new companies. Today's investments and acquisitions continue in this mode and are often part of China's Made in China 2025 strategy, through which China plans to become, by hook or by crook, a superpower in smart manufacturing, digitization, and emerging technologies, leaving foreign competitors behind. I can assure you, ladies and gentlemen, that isolationist policies are not the right remedy to effectively challenge the Red Dragon's vision of solely dominating the digital manufacturing sector. Only through cohesive merger and acquisition policies and intensified as well as more resilient cooperation between democratic nations will we be able to effectively thwart these perilous dynamics. Lastly, let me conclude by reminding you that this new technological revolution will possibly render millions of jobs obsolete, but equally carries the power to create millions of new opportunities and jobs. To quote Adam Neumann, as the world becomes a more digital place, we cannot forget about the human connection. We therefore also have to shoulder the immense moral responsibility to reflect on how this new digital revolution can firstly benefit the majority of humanity, and secondly, be made sustainable in the long run. As the resident representative of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, and in the spirit of our core value of solidarity, I firmly believe that we must never neglect this social component. However, the experiences of the last year and the current dynamics in the realm of digital manufacturing have me feeling abundantly confident that we can do justice to this responsibility and the challenges that accompany it. One point is certain, and I'm sure we all agree on it: if implemented properly, the digital manufacturing industry 4.0 could revitalize our pandemic-ridden economies and thus represent a watershed moment towards greater prosperity and equality in India and the rest of the terra firma. After all, John F. Kennedy did say, "Change is the law of life, and those who look only to the past or present are certain to miss the future." And now it's my honor to yield the floor to you, my dear friend Manjit, who will be moderating today's panel discussion, which is once again filled to the brim with insightful experts who will broaden our horizons and explore new, exciting, and innovative ideas and thoughts about the future of India's digital manufacturing sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. So we're going to jump right in. And Sunil, the first question is to you. As Peter said, companies that view digital adoption as an option in the pre-COVID era have now made it a business imperative. What are the lasting changes that you see as a result of this transition in the Indian manufacturing sector? Is this the Sputnik moment for Indian manufacturing?
Thank you, Manjeet. That's a very broad question, and I think one issue has really become clear through the pandemic over the last 1.5 years, and that is really that how critical digitalization actually is, not only for manufacturing, but the way it's taken over our lives. From an Indian perspective, though, I think there have been three major focuses that most manufacturing companies, particularly small and medium enterprises, have actually been looking out for. One is flexibility. With the changes that are happening every day, every week, manufacturing organizations will need to be more flexible. So flexibility is one. The other is saving costs, saving capex, and saving cash. And when you put that all together and underlay it with quality, you get a complete picture really of what digitalization can do. India is really at the threshold right now. When you look at the way Indian manufacturing is growing, is intended to grow through all the different programs, I think there will be a couple of trends that we will see. Let's start with the obvious one, and that is collaboration across the entire business chain, starting from design right through to delivery and the entire process in between. The silo organizations will disappear and you will have one standard platform. There will be a demand for high-speed, secured wireless networks that can really handle high volume and high velocity of data. There has been a very clear feeling of what really remote monitoring of operations can actually do. How digital twins on the manufacturing can really make a difference, particularly at a time like this. How remote support from the original equipment manufacturers can really improve the availability of assets. How robotic process automation can really strengthen and take care of areas which were earlier labor intensive. Artificial intelligence and blockchain technologies will lead to a faster decision making and better accountability and quality and traceability. All of this happening at the back end. And I think this is really India's forte. We've got the software capabilities, and these are things that we are really good at. We will see logistics having a completely different meaning, and performance-based logistics will become very, very critical in the new world. Businesses have learned how critical it is to de-risk and really look at onshoring versus offshoring. Maybe the size of factories will get much smaller. Warehousing strategies are having to change, all out of the experiences we have recently experienced and are experiencing. So I think also there are going to be issues of additive manufacturing. We are seeing the demand for new parts to be produced really on demand because you can't predict long term anymore. So rapid prototyping, hyper customization, and the ability to manufacture small batches of products is going to become critical. Cybersecurity is going to be central to the entire digital story that India is putting together. And India is really thinking about all these issues right now. I mean, if you look at what a microbe has done in the real world to us, think about what it can do, what havoc it can do if it is pushed into the industrial networks. So I think the opportunities are there. India is really at the cusp of it. Small and medium enterprises are now beginning to get hungry for it. So I'm really excited about the future in this country.
Thank you, Sunil. That was exciting. Michael, geopolitical issues with China and the ongoing pandemic have made many countries take a closer look, as Sunil has said, at their manufacturing capabilities. So the US under the Biden administration is also looking at this. It's announced the Build Back Better. India has the Atmanirbhar initiative. China has a dual circulation policy, and Japan has incentivized reshoring. Clearly, the new era of manufacturing has dawned. And what role will digital manufacturing play?
Well, thank you very much, Manjeet, for inviting me to participate in this panel. This is, of course, a striking time everywhere as the pandemic gets worse in India, improves in other parts of the globe, and we sort of grapple simultaneously with ginning up the increased production capacity for vaccines, while at the same time, as the pandemic ebbs in some parts of the world, seeing a great increase in demand for goods. And we have not yet finished learning the lessons from this pandemic about what we need to do about supply chains. When I look at the Biden proposal, what is striking is that he's putting lots of money in. He proposes to put lots of money into manufacturing in the US, but does not actually mention digital manufacturing, which is a surprise to me, at least in the top line of his proposal, which is what we've got so far. So, right at this moment, people are still grappling with the question of just how big and how much, okay? And as Sunil said, as Peter said, okay, this is an amazing period of transformation. I think we're going to sort of have to learn how to separate out different parts of the production process. I mean, we'll sort of talk about this when I talk about the manufacturing stack, design, costing out manufacturing, okay, where you want to do it, the ability to sort of produce materials and goods within your own border has become much more essential. So Neil referred to that as de-risking, okay, which is a great word, okay. It means an awful lot, but in this case, what it means is that if something really bad happens, that you have manufacturing, the capabilities of boosting your own manufacturing production very quickly, okay. On the other hand, you don't want to sort of use this as an excuse for isolationism, and you want to, how do you sort of balance out the ability to work hand in hand with countries like India, while at the same time being able to have the flexibility to sort of move production from one country to another very quickly. And this requires breaking down the production process, the design process, the operation process into pieces that can be shifted very quickly, which then gets into the whole China question, which is that you don't want to be in a situation where you are held captive to Chinese manufacturers, okay, whether or not that's for consumer goods or for semiconductors or for pharmaceuticals. And that's really the interesting place where we are at this point, which is, the Biden plan looks at creating an office in the US government that sort of talks about essential manufacturing. We have to think about what we mean about essential manufacturing in the digital context without actually going isolationist. And that's going to be the key point going forward.
Thank you, Michael. That is very interesting. Rajat, you have the World Economic Forum Global Lighthouse Network has identified 69 manufacturing facilities in China and in the world, and China is a clear leader. India now has 3 facilities on the list. I don't know whether we're catching up, but at least we have 3, and you've been associated with all 3. How have these companies adopted digital, and what's different relative to the others that have tried but not been as successful?
First, thanks, Manjeet, for inviting me to this discussion. let me caveat my answer before I get to it by saying that my own experience on digitization in manufacturing has been very much in the resource-based process industries, or heavy industrial areas like metals, mining, chemicals, refining, and so on, pulp and paper. And so I speak from that experience. I should say that the other piece of experience that I speak from is that if you look at the full list of digital lighthouses, 69 of them as you referred to, there are only 13 that are from these process industries or upstream industries, if you choose to call them that. McKinsey's happened to have supported 8 of them on their digital journeys, and they have, some of them have, and all of those have gotten to be lighthouses. And this kind of raises a few questions. First, it's only 13 out of 69, right, of these process industries, and a lot of heavy manufacturing happens. Does that mean that these sectors by themselves are low tech, right, and are far away from digital manufacturing? That's one question that it raises. I mean, in general, to your other point of successful and less successful companies, our experience is that only about 1/6 of the companies that do embark on a digital transformation actually get there, will fully succeed in adopting.
Wow.
So it's not, I mean, and this is not, I mean, in general, it's said that about 1/3 of the companies that embark on a transformation get there, but if the rate is probably half, and the rate used to be lower, it's getting to half of that now. So that's just a little bit of backdrop. With that backdrop, let me then hone into what does it take to make a successful digital transformation. And particularly in the kinds of industries that I talked about, including how are those differentiated from several other industries which have lighthouses in the World Economic Forum list, including a lot of tech industries and assembly industries, to which Sunil is better positioned to talk. I think there are 4 differences. Difference number 1 between the ones that do become good at digital manufacturing, at least in the sectors I'm referring to, versus the ones that are unable to, is that the companies really focus on business value. Now, digital is a big word, right? So that you can say blockchain, one can talk about robotics, RPA. There's a large number of technologies that one can talk about. I think value is where businesses have to start from. So my own experience on digital, by the way, at McKinsey, we used to talk about digital and data for 15 years almost now. But I really saw the impact of this about 4 or 5 years ago, where at a client of mine, the client had a problem of yield being at 80% for a high value product, which means that 20% of the product that was being put in the machine was being wasted. This is a rolling mill. And they said, we can't solve this problem. We've been at it for 9 months. The yield has gotten to 80% and it doesn't get any better. It was a new product introduction, lightweight steel, good for the climate. And they then said, why don't you see if you can solve it? You guys talk a big talk on digital. We didn't know whether we could or not. We sent a data scientist, a data engineer, project manager into the facility, who worked with the process engineer of the mill, the person who understood how the process worked. They stitched the data together all the way from far upstream to a bit downstream. And that took 6 weeks. The data wasn't very well organized. They took 1 week, the data scientist, and did some numbers, jugglery, that data scientists do. And they came up with 3 hypotheses. One of those hypotheses was the heating furnace just before this rolling step. There's 6 elements of the heating furnace. One of those PLCs had to be reprogrammed to stabilize the heating furnace, the way the heating was happening. They made that change, the reprogramming in that PLC. And the next week, the yields were at 99.5%. So this was magic. This was my introduction to digital in heavy manufacturing. What happened? The process engineer, the process owner there said, look, I would have solved this problem, but I just don't know whether I would have solved it in 3 days or 3 years. And in this case, data, and big words again, AI, ML, which is some of the algorithms that were used out there, actually solved that problem in 6-8 weeks with a fair degree of certainty. But the core of this was they started with a business problem first. So this thing about being value focused, this thing about being business focused is lesson number 1. Lesson number 2, these industries that I'm talking about are really high tech. right? So a lot of people say, oh, we need to go get this technology, we need to wire this up and put this data together, we need to get these robots in here and so on. But I find that if I walk into a steel plant, I'll find 115,000 sensors in a plant. And these are sensors that have been installed by people like Sunil. And with the high-tech equipment that they put in place. They have DCSs, they have memories. They may be missing a little bit of storage here and there, but these are really high-tech manufacturing facilities. And yet, there's an opportunity here to do something different. So there's enough data out there. And data used well for decision-making, for controlling the plant better, that's what gives the opportunity. So my second point is, those that say, I want to put the next level of technology in, don't necessarily get to the right answer.
Yeah.
People like Sunil have put a lot of technology in already, which is being under-leveraged. That technology used properly with a little bit of Band-Aid here and there, like I said, you may need a bit of memory, you may need a little bit of storage, and a lot of capability. The ability to put that data together in an appropriate way, the ability to outline a business problem, the ability to do the data science on that, the ability to interpret the output of the data science. That combination or that magic is what's needed. The third point, and I'll finish quickly now, is building the capability. So it's not as much about the technology, because the technology often is already there. It may be in the next generation as technology changes, but it is about the capability to use that technology. And this capability, in my view, has to be built in-house by companies. It can't be outsourced. It's becoming so core to how you make things, because machines will control. So you don't need men to control or women to control things. What you need is people who will be able to do the design on top of the algorithms, of the decision making and the intelligence, so that the software controls the machine better. So the capability has to be in-house. And then the last thing that I have noticed, that I've seen across those companies that have become adopters of digital in these kinds of sectors, is that it can't be done in little bits and pieces. It can't. That's what we call the pilot purgatory. You have to escape the pilot purgatory. You have to do it at scale. Yes. There have to be enough cases so that top management pays attention to it and devotes the necessary resources for the capability building that needs to happen. In fact, one of the things that we say, I don't know how accurate it is, it probably is in some circumstances, is that for every dollar of technology investment, there's need for a dollar of capability investment, which doesn't easily, unless top management sees this thing for themselves and are programmatic about it. So be value focused, there's enough data, go after the business problem, 3, build capability, and 4, do it at scale in a programmatic manner.
That's really interesting. Sunil, would you like to respond?
Well, I can only agree with everything Rajat has said. It's spot on. Particularly, the amount of data that exists in everything that we do. And he's talking about steel plants and process plants. But if you take a power plant even, there are 5,000 sensors on a turbine, right? And if you look at the numbers that Rajat is talking about, this is generating a huge amount of data. Now the question really is that data is only good as you can interpret it. And this is where you really need people who understand how to interpret this data and really make some use out of it. And I completely agree with Rajat. The benefits of really looking at this, or the impact of the data, can be enormous. And Peter mentioned our own experience in the factory in Germany of over 1,000%. The same factory, using the strength of digitalization, is now able to produce at a productivity level of 99.99% and a quality level of 99.99%. Now, there is no way that you can do that just physically. It has to come through data, through continuous improvement, resulting from adapting what you learn out of the data that you get to feed back into machines to perform even more efficiently. So I think this is the beauty of digitalization. It can kind of take you completely to the next level, into horizons that you didn't know actually existed.
Thank you, Sunil. I'm going to, Michael, would you like to also respond to what Rajat and Sunil said, and then I'm going to ask you about your manufacturing stack.
Yes, actually I would. I actually had a question for Rajat in terms of, what were you saying about what the success rate was of the journey to digitalization? I didn't quite follow that.
Yeah, I mean, it's typically 1 in 6.
See, I think that's just an amazing statistic in terms of our ability to sort of rebuild the world's production process, the supply chain. We have to be able to sort of, move much more successfully towards digitalization. And I think that this is something interesting to sort of think about, because I think that this is not just India we're talking about here. I think in the US as well, based on my experience, that a lot of companies have a tough time actually digitizing, okay, in a successful way. This is not an India problem. This is a US and Europe and Japanese problem as well.
It's a quad problem too. Michael, can you tell us a little bit about your manufacturing stack? What made you create it? What were you thinking, and how did it happen? And where does it stand today?
We're all familiar with the network stack, which is the ability to we think about different layers of the network, whether it's the physical layer or the transport layer or the application layer, and this division enables us to divide and conquer in terms of having different companies sort of attack different levels of the stack, sort of make our problems simpler, much more easy to solve. Okay, and so rather than sort of having the same, rather than having this deal with the problems of getting bits and bytes from one place to another, we can assume that that problem's been solved and just work on the application layer. Okay, and the same thing is true for manufacturing. When I think about the different layers of manufacturing, you've got the design layer, you've got the cost and manufacturability layer, where you decide how much it's going to cost and where and what can be manufactured. You've got the actual production layer, and you've got the logistics layer. And we can think about, I mean, a company like Siemens will sort of do all of these, okay, because you're ultra competent in everything. Okay. But if I'm a smaller manufacturing company, I'm only going to be able to sort of do 1 or 2 of these layers, and the ability to have manufacturing startups, have companies in India, say, come in at one layer, come in another layer, is essential for breaking down the problem and maybe perhaps making the digital journey easier. Okay, part of the reason why the digital journey is so difficult is that companies are having to deal with all these layers at the same time. If we could break it down, it becomes much easier. So I think that this is a way of thinking about the digital manufacturing problem that will make it easier for Indian companies to join in with the global manufacturing network without having to sort of tackle so many different problems at once.
Thank you, Michael. Rajat, I'm going to go back to something you said, which is we need to build capabilities, skills also. Can you describe that a little bit more, and how will a country like India actually make that happen?
Let me describe this at a bit more of a micro level, right? How do I see capabilities being built? I talked about it a minute ago. How do I see even large manufacturers build real capability in this new digital domain? Again, my reference point is very much the process industries. By the way, again, my own experience has been that I've tried different things, right? So we tried academies or classroom training, and we found that, fine, it would make people familiar, but they would leave the classroom, and in a week, 90% of what they had learned would be out of their heads. What I have found the most effective in building capabilities is actually a little bit of classroom training, ideally just in time, not just in case, combined with real project work. So that's number one. I think a lot of talk on, at least the kind of work that I have seen done, is let's go hire people from the outside. And frankly, in some of the industries that I work in, these are remote plants in difficult locations. It's often hard to hire the ISI mathematician or the MSc from the MSc from IIT, mathematics from IIT, and so on. Bring them in there. So one of the things we found is that it was much better to actually take the existing engineers who are very smart, very excited, by themselves doing things in Python and R, having a reasonable sense of algorithms because they've gone on to Coursera and learned a bit of that, and actually give them projects to do and create cross-functional teams of process engineers, somebody doing the data science, somebody doing the data engineering, somebody project managing this whole thing. And with a little bit of spotlight from top management, delivering real performance improvement, real business performance improvement, a chemical reduction in a chemical process, chemical waste reduction in a chemical process, and so on, right? Give them real business targets. And that combination then, it may be a 2-month sprint, it may be a 5-month sprint of actually delivering the project, that really builds capability. So our engineers are very capable of math. And our engineers are very capable of understanding the process of stitching the data together and learning reasonable amounts of data science. This is how I've seen capabilities being really built internally.
It's on the job, yeah.
It's really on the job and really also exciting people. In fact, I have to tell you that my own experience has been that hiring from the outside has not worked, right? People will come, they won't enjoy it, they won't integrate really well, they will leave. Right? While these people who are insiders, they really feel like the companies and corporations have invested in them and they've come up another level. So that's how I believe capabilities will get very good.
Thank you. And I think we saw that at Tata Steel in particular. They didn't use the TCS engineers, they used their own in-house engineers who came from different fields, right? Mining, et cetera, et cetera. And Sunil, just going back to you, honestly, India has announced all these several, PLI, production-linked incentive schemes to encourage manufacturing. How can our domestic and international manufacturers in India leverage digital technologies for economies of scale and maximize the benefits so that these government incentives can actually work?
So Manjeet, this is a much broader issue. The Indian government has stated a very clear objective of growing the share of manufacturing to GDP from roughly 15% to 25% of GDP. Now, what does that exactly mean? It means effectively a capex investment, a capital expenditure investment over the next 5 to 7 years of close to $1.5 trillion, right? Now, if we are looking at that kind of volumes, and how do I come to that? Today, if we are 15% of GDP, let's say 3 trillion GDP, 15% of that is 450 billion, right? We want to get to 25% of GDP, assume a 7% growth over the next 5 or 7 years. You go from a 3 trillion to, let's say, a 5 trillion economy. 25% of a 5 trillion economy is roughly 1.2 trillion. So you're adding $800 billion of capex into the system. When you add $800 billion of capex into the system, of consumption into the system, not capex, you will need at least double that amount of capex to produce that output. So we are looking at close to $1.5 billion of capex coming in the next couple of years. I know I said a trillion, I meant $1.5 billion, slight difference. Now, with $1.5 billion of capex coming in the next 5 to 7 years, there aren't too many countries around the world, except now with the expectation of the United States of a major expansionary program there of a couple of trillions. But other than that, there aren't too many other countries around the world that are looking at capital expenditure in that of that volume. So what's going to happen? You're going to get countries around the world looking to start manufacturing in India. What are they doing? Digitalization. The capex that India does is not going to be adequate to support as a business plan to support only the consumption in India. It's going to be, we're going to have to export. When we start exporting, who are the competition that we're dealing with? All the international players. What are they doing? Digitalization of manufacturing. So what's happening over there? We are slowly, whether we like it or not, we will have to go for digitalization in the manufacturing process. And that's why the move of the PLI system of the government is a very strategic move, is to slowly start moving Indian and incentivizing Indian industry to start thinking about manufacturing, but manufacturing for those volumes. However, having said that, Indian industry still has a disadvantage of, depends who you ask, 10 to 15% cost of production over the competition, international competition. The big players are known, the big countries are known. Now, the cost of doing business in India is still bringing us down by about, gives us a disadvantage of 10 to 15%. So what does that mean? It means we are going to have to start improving the infrastructure, bringing in digitalization there, and everything that I had spoken about earlier on, because without that, we are not going to have be able to cut that 10 to 15% cost out of the system. We're going to need electricity, we're going to need logistics, we're going to need digitalization, all taking out that cost. And this is where Industry 4.0 and digitalization becomes so central and so critical to the overall plan of achieving the target or the vision of the government of going from 15% of GDP to 25% of GDP. So I think the PLI scheme is a good initiative from the government, but industry is going to have to do a lot more to step up, and digitalization is going to be the center of that initiative.
And you think our industry is cognizant and getting prepared for this? And I'm going to ask the same question of you, Rajat. Is it cognizant, getting prepared the way Germany is, say, for instance?
So I think Indian industry was reticent 2 years ago. In the last 2 years, they've become much more receptive. They have seen the benefits of digitalization. For example, how do you commission a plant in a remote location of India? And they've realized that, that there are technologies, augmented reality, for example, where you can, by remote, using the people at the location, actually commission a plant. You don't have to fly people across. And you can use these technologies, which are all digital technologies, to do amazing things that we thought are actually impossible to be done. Productivity can go to a completely different level. Costs can be reduced tremendously out of all this. And I think this is what Indian industry, and particularly small and medium enterprises, are slowly beginning to realize. Until yesterday, digitalization was only for the big boys.
Yes.
Right? And now, small and medium enterprises are beginning to ask the question, how can I save cash? How can I save costs? How can I save capex? And by the way, while I'm doing this, how can I expand my opportunities out there in the market and get a broader spectrum of products, possibly lead me into the export market, which means higher quality controls as well. And this is really a perfect recipe for digitalization.
Yeah, that sounds good. Rajat, do you think that's the way things are moving? I mean, if we've jumped from 1 to 3 Lighthouse Network companies, how is there a line? Is there a good lineup for next year?
Crystal ball gazing. I think it's too early to say, right? I mean, we'll only know when we know it, right? When it happens. Maybe just let me reinforce some of what Sunil said, right? So there are two aspects to this. One, India in many sectors is uncompetitive, right? Ranging from 5 to 15%, right? You take electronics manufacturing or assembly, you take even some well-known sectors like textiles, for reasons for it, right? So Sunil referred to several of these, but if you take, I think there's the logistics costs, which is linked to logistics infrastructure. There is the power cost, which is linked to all of the cross subsidies that our industry faces. There's the productivity of labor itself. And then there is land and other utilities, which also is more expensive, right? So this combination is what makes us less competitive. Scale in some cases also linked to productivity. Now, if you take these factors and let's say for a moment, you say, look, you're uncompetitive by about 7%, at least in the sectors that I work on, I think you can make that much up through digitization. What is it? It's better asset utilization. So making more from the same digester in a paper plant, a pulp plant, for example, or reducing chemical usage and therefore or improving quality yields of product, right? So there's about, my sense is that over a course of 3 years, well-performing company can get to 7%. And we have, in a course of 1.5 years, you can get as much as 4 percentage points of export. And over a course of maybe two cycles of that, you could potentially get 6 or 7 points. So I think there is real potential here, at least for large, I'm not referring again from my own experience of working with large companies, for large companies to remove the competitive disadvantages that we have as a nation. Now, back to Sunil's point, is this going to be enough? Probably not, because everybody, they may do it slower, they may do it faster. India may have more engineers, they may have smarter engineers potentially, and so on. So we may have a bit of a lead for a bit, but won't last. So I think at one level, for us to be competitive, we have to fire on all cylinders. We have to make sure the infrastructure comes into place. We have to make sure the cross subsidies go away. We have to make sure that productivity improvements occur, a lot of them through digital, right? And so all of these pieces of the puzzle have to come together for India to be competitive, both to serve our own consumers and to bring more of the people into the consuming class to buy these products, as well as for us to be competitive globally as a second supply source to China, which we are being talked about in many, many sectors.
And do you think
back to your question of, is it happening? Will it happen? Yeah, I think it is happening.
Yes.
If I look around the PLI, I certainly think has stirred a lot of our industrial houses to think about entering new sectors. I see that. Sunil must be seeing a lot more of that because they are placing equipment orders in this company, I'm sure, or beginning to think about doing it. But I certainly see conversations that me and my colleagues are having with companies at a much higher pace than 2 years ago in manufacturing and new manufacturing. So is it happening? Yes. Will it happen? Let's wait and see.
Okay.
Can I add something to?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
So when I hear 5 to 15%, okay, I think about, well, if I'm thinking about resilience as a systems property, how much am I willing to pay for resilience? How much am I willing to pay for a second source? Not on a company level, but on a country level. For the US at this point, does US have an incentive, okay, that's worth 5 to 15%, to make sure that India is sort of coming up as a competitive, the word competitive is a weird word in this context as we come through a pandemic, because there's other goals besides competitiveness. There is resilience, there is the ability to sort of be able to sort of produce for your own people, the ability to stay close to the frontier. And I think what digitalization gives you is an insight into the other issues besides cost that drives production decisions, that drives investment decisions. And I think from the US perspective, at least, it's actually important to sort of move that up as part of policy.
Well, Michael, I think the counter view to this could be memories are short.
I mean, memories were short. I understand that. Okay. part of what we have to do is actually ensure that memories are not as short as they were in the past. I agree. You know, what's fascinating about this is I think that this, I mean, as true in India, but it's true, it's going to be true in the US too. I think that the US is going to be hit by an inflationary wave. Right? That's going to make the memories be longer than they would have been otherwise. This is not a crisis that's going to pass quickly. It's going to have a lot of ramifications in terms of manufacturing that people have to think about. But I understand what you mean by memories are short.
I'm not necessarily subscribing to that view, but it is a possibility. I think this, to your point about inflation, absolutely, inflation is going to come for a variety of reasons. Right? There will be supply side pushes to inflation too, in addition to the demand side. But I think also it is precisely that inflation at a micro level again, right? So when a buyer in the US that buys a certain chemical from China at price X comes to India, and a supplier in India says, I can only supply it to you at 1.1x because those are my costs. Fine, for a little bit. But at some point of time, because of the inflation that you referred to, etc., certainly the buyer in the US is going to ask the Indian supplier to match the price. So there's going to be pressure on margins, right? For sure, at a micro level, right? So I mean, it's better for India to therefore, and Indian companies to therefore strive for competitiveness and with support from our government.
Yeah, but even so, this is where policy comes through in terms of the U.S. Okay, because if you sort of view China as running a strategic production policy that involves doing things that lower costs that may or may not be correct economically in the short run, right? Then it requires a policy choice on the part of buyers, whether they're in US or Europe, to sort of take a step back and say, should we, I mean, this goes to, Sunil, to your CapEx point, should we help fund, okay, investment in India, right? Even if it creates new competition for US companies in a way that produces a much more balanced global production situation. And I mean, this is part of what we're looking at here in the US. What in fact should the US policy be going forward? What does made in America mean? Does made in America mean made in America, or does it mean setting up production processes that actually are much more balanced than relying on China?
So Michael, there's another angle. I think that is more technology driven, which is in a way beginning to drive decisions around the entire manufacturing story. And that is, until pre-pandemic, companies decided we want to build 3 factories and we'll do them in these 3 countries. And that's it. We don't want to have factories all over the world. We'll choose the best location, and we put all our manufacturing for the entire world into these 2 or 3. Now, post-pandemic, and this is what I call the de-risking angle, it's become apparent that there are some countries that are able to manage it better than others. There are also political angles that get in there, but also technology offers a completely fresh opportunity. And that is to scale down the size of the factories and actually go down to micro factories and bring your factories closer to your consumers. And therefore, maybe the big, large factories that used to produce for the whole world will be a thing of the past, or could be a thing of the past, as you move towards micro factories, where really it doesn't matter where you're producing, you're closer to home, closer to your consumer, and you can meet the specific regional requirements of that specific consumer using the platform, a digital platform that can be common across the world. So shoe sizes, for example, may vary in one part of the world from the other, but if you've got a common platform that can design the shoes and the shapes and the designs, on a central platform, you can then tailor make factories closer to those regions to actually produce requirements over there. So I think it's an interesting transition that we're in, and maybe a little bit of all of these things will play out. But at the very center of this conversation is also the fresh opportunity of digitalization that is now crept in.
Michael, and do you want to respond to that, or can I ask you the next question?
You can ask me the next question.
Okay.
It flows right into that.
So the question which we talk about, this is all exciting, but then at the heart of everything is jobs, right? There's a common perception that Industry 4.0 will lead to loss of jobs. And Michael, I know you don't believe that is the case. So what can India and other developing countries, even the United States, right, which is jobs is very, very important just now. How are you going to be able to create these well-paying jobs? And I know Rajat talked about capacity building. Is that all part of it?
It's capacity building. It's in fact lowering prices, whether or not it's through better manufacturing or better logistics in a way that expands markets. And when you expand markets, you expand jobs. So a country that moves from 15% to sort of 25% of GDP being manufacturing is going to create more jobs. And I think those distributed, I mean, I've actually sort of written papers about the distributed manufacturing, creating jobs around the world in places that did not have them before in terms of manufacturing. Now, the case that the proof point for this actually in the US is actually Amazon and logistics, which is that Amazon roboticized the distribution process and was actually able to sort of create demand that was not there before and create jobs that was not there before, and has been a net plus. That the jobs created in the fulfillment centers have far exceeded, and fulfillment centers and delivery have far exceeded the jobs lost in retailing, because retailing was low productivity work, okay, where a lot of the work was being done by households. And what's happened is that this household production has been moved into the market sector and created jobs. So Sunil, when you sort of talk about the shoes that are better fits, okay, there's a whole thread about that, which I'm sure you were aware about, that customized manufacturing can create jobs that were not there before because people are getting products that they could not get. If you sort of ask yourself the question, what do you not have because it's too expensive? That's an answer. That's the flip side of that, is what jobs can be created, okay, by making things cheaper that are not available now. So I'm actually firmly in the view that as digitization moves into the physical industries, we're actually going to see job creation as opposed to job destruction in terms of what the ultimate end is going to be. And at this point now, there's no evidence against that. We are not seeing a shortage of jobs in the US. In fact, right now we're seeing a shortage of workers.
And I'm going to ask a question of all of you. So Michael, we are now at the fourth industrial revolution, and I know we haven't even quite got there, but what is on the horizon for the fifth?
Oh, come on. I mean, I think we're moving into a biotech boom globally. Okay. And I see, you know, can I answer the question that's in the chat box at this point?
Yes, you can.
Okay. So someone asked
services?
someone asked a question about the vaccinations.
Okay.
Okay. India and vaccination and getting help from the US. And I absolutely think that the US has an obligation to help out India at this point in a lot of different ways. And we've actually written about patent buyouts as one possible solution to this. But in a broader sense, India has the opportunity of being a full participant in the coming biotech revolution that has been delayed for 20 years for a variety of reasons around the globe that the pandemic has actually accelerated. So when we talk about digitization at this point, partly what I'm thinking about is not simply digitization in the context of steel, okay, or in the process of heavy machinery, but digitization in the process of, you know, in the context of biotech products of various sorts, where India clearly has the opportunity to be a leader there. And the process of getting from here to there, what the US needs to do to sort of help India at this point in terms of opening up the supply chains, opening up some of the production processes, buying out some patents, absolutely essential. And this is a key. When we talk about digitization, we have to think about it in terms of the biotech side as well as the heavy manufacturing side as well, because this is where we're going. Where we're going for Industry 5.0 is the biosciences, the bio revolution.
And we saw there's still a lot of resistance in the US on the patents. I mean, it is it's continuous.
So there's a lot of resistance. I think the US has an obligation at this point. You know, the US was traumatized by the pandemic and the Trump years, and the Biden is undoing this. And I think there's a lot of will to help out the ongoing problems in India at this point. I know that, you know, like I said, the Progressive Policy Institute has come out in favor of patent buyouts, okay, and which is one way to get from here to there.
That's really good to know, and we will be following that and quoting it, Michael. I think that Sunil, would you also like to to look at the fifth revolution? Michael says it's biotech wave, the fifth industrial revolution.
I think, Manjeet, the opportunities in the fourth revolution are huge. I wouldn't like to move towards the fifth revolution at this point in time, because the fourth revolution is going to open up avenues that don't exist today, and that we don't know about. And I think, and that's the scary bit. We talked about, you know, the manpower issue and the competence issue and so on. In a lot of our schools and colleges around the world, including here in India,
Yes.
What we are teaching our kids today is not going to be relevant tomorrow. You know, and things are changing so rapidly. I think the fifth revolution will emerge as we get halfway through the fourth revolution. And I think there are a whole lot of new avenues. Material sciences is bringing up a completely different, opening up a completely different horizon. Biogenetics is building up a whole new area as well. The entire issue of healthcare is going to be a completely different area as well. But linked with all that, there are going to be, I think, companies around the world will start looking at technologies from an emergingly different perspective. Issues of decarbonization will play a much greater role. Issues of affordability of healthcare is going to play a completely different role now. And I think these are now going to be elements that will play into whichever technological leap we take. Once we get, let's say, halfway down Industry 4.0, I think areas of the environment and of social equality around the world, you know, the haves versus the have-nots, and making affordable healthcare, making sure that food is available, and so on and so forth. These are going to be issues that will create completely different business models and completely different technological solutions. And there are a lot of them on the way right now.
Yeah. Thank you.
Manjeet, if I may add,
yes.
It took 200 years for the fourth revolution to get here, right? Steam was 200 years old, and then power came and so on. So I think hopefully this revolution will last for a little bit and play out, as Sunil said. If I just think about one of the major trends, Sunil referred to it, one of the major trends that will roil the world in the next 20 or 30 years, it is going to be around decarbonization, perhaps more so than some of the others that have been mentioned. I mean, and maybe data and to digitization and many of these things will be perhaps tools towards the solution or part solution to this. But there are going to be whole swaths of industries that are going to be left stranded. I mean, with 120 or 130 odd countries having pledged maybe 70-60% of the world's emission, having pledged zero carbon pathways to by 2050 or thereabouts, China's 2060. This is going to be the big shift that's coming. And I might say that there is a whole host of industries that will be left stranded. There'll be a whole host of industries that will come in place, like solar industries emerged in the last 10 years, both all the way from manufacturing to generation. And then be a whole host of people who are stuck indecisive because many of these new technologies are not economic. Many of the old technologies are likely to go stranded. So this is going to be a very difficult period, also a very exciting period of churn and turmoil. And that force, I think, is coming.
That's interesting. So you're predicting also that there will be people in purgatory. There's going to be a purgatory and things on the other side till the transition takes place.
Well, yeah, we've seen that already, right? So valuations of some of these smokestack industries, if I might call them that, have many geographies have gone very far down relative to their cash flows.
Yes.
The cash flows should be supporting its valuation. So I think there is a big change, big shift.
So thank you. Do we have any more questions? Actually, there is a question about services. Actually, this is for Sunil. It's not related to digital manufacturing, but can the PLI scheme be extended more to sectors like services in which India is strong?
I think so. The question is, what is the intent of the PLI? And I think India has announced that it wants to be a manufacturing hub, and the PLI scheme is basically promoting that intent. As far as services are concerned, we are already a very significant player in the global arena there, and therefore incentivizing that further, in my view, may not necessarily make sense. Having said that, there could be areas within the service sector. You know, the question really is: we've been always in many areas, we have been termed as the back office of the world. And that's not necessarily a particularly complimentary terminology. I do believe we have the capability to be the front office of the world in the area of services as well. And I think this will require us to get a much greater understanding of what the challenges are around the world, and enable us to then start moving in that direction. So I think I wouldn't necessarily say the PLI scheme is the ideal scheme for that, but there possibly needs to be some kind of a scheme that maybe not even a central scheme. This is something that companies do need to do and need to see for themselves as being an opportunity for India to move from the back office to the front office. And indeed, in many areas we have been able to do that pretty successfully.
Sunil, thank you. This has been absolutely a terrific discussion. We thought we learned something about digital manufacturing in our paper, but we've learned so much more in this discussion with all of you. So this is what happens when you get great minds to come together and exchange thoughts with each other. So a big thank you to you, Sunil. Thank you very much for coming on board, and congratulations for your own work on digital manufacturing in India. Rajat, you too. You've really helped to push the envelope in India, and thank you for coming on board. And Michael, of course, thank you very much for bringing this all to our notice and letting us know that Indian companies were already participating in digital manufacturing, even though we didn't know it. So thank you very much, all of you. Peter, thank you again. And to a terrific audience, thank you. This can all be found on YouTube. The link will be available on the Gateway House website. And we look forward to seeing you again in a couple of weeks. Thank you.
Thank you.